World War I, the war no one wanted. Hi, I'm David, and welcome back to another episode of our podcast. World War I is one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. It led to the deaths of millions and reshaped the global political landscape forever. But what if I told you that this catastrophic war was a conflict that no one truly wanted? That it wasn't the result of one grand, clear-cut conflict, but rather a tangled web of misunderstandings, alliances, and fear? How did the world end up in a war that could have been avoided? In this episode, we're going to look at the complex chain of events that led to the outbreak of World War I, often referred to as the Great War. How did the world's powers, many of whom had no desire for war, get pulled into this catastrophic conflict? And why was this war called a war that no one wanted? Let's take a step back and examine the situation leading up to 1914. By the early 20th century, Europe was a continent on the brink. Major powers like Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia were locked in a tense system of alliances, with each nation closely tied to another. These alliances were meant to deter aggression by creating a balance of power, but they also had a dangerous side effect. If one nation went to war, it could drag the others into the conflict, even if they weren't directly involved. The tensions in Europe were made worse by growing nationalism, imperial competition, and military buildups. The major powers were all vying for dominance in their respective regions, seeking to expand their empires and influence. But despite these tensions, most leaders in Europe had no real desire for an all-out war. Diplomacy was still the preferred method for resolving disputes, and many leaders were keenly aware of the horrific consequences that war could bring. However, everything changed on June 28, 1914, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. This tragic event set off a chain reaction that quickly escalated into a full-scale war. The assassination wasn't the direct cause of the war. Rather, it was the spark that ignited an already volatile situation. Austria-Hungary, with the backing of Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding that the Serbian government take responsibility for the assassination and punish those responsible. Serbia, with the support of Russia, rejected some of these demands. This sparked a series of mobilizations and declarations of war. Within weeks, Europe was plunged into a global conflict. But how did this assassination lead to such a massive war? The answer lies in the complex system of alliances that had been built over decades. Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia triggered a chain reaction. Russia, which had close ties with Serbia, began mobilizing its forces. In turn, Germany, which had an alliance with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, was pulled in. Germany then invaded Belgium to reach France, prompting Britain to declare war on Germany in defense of Belgium's neutrality. What started as a localized conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia quickly escalated into a war involving most of Europe. And yet, none of the countries involved truly wanted this war. Leaders were caught in a web of obligations to their allies and were unable to find a peaceful resolution before tensions boiled over. In fact, many leaders initially hoped that the war would be short-lived. They underestimated the scale of the conflict and believed that their armies would achieve quick victories. But as the war dragged on, it became clear that this was no ordinary conflict. The war was characterized by trench warfare, new technologies like machine guns and tanks, and the first large-scale use of chemical weapons. The horrors of the war were unimaginable, and millions of soldiers and civilians alike paid the price. So why did it happen? Why did Europe, a continent that had experienced centuries of diplomatic negotiations and peacemaking, suddenly descend into such a devastating war? One key factor was the miscalculation of political leaders. Many believed that the war would be quick and decisive, not realizing how deadly and drawn out it would become. The complex system of alliances also played a major role, as it meant that one conflict quickly spiraled into a larger war. Additionally, the growing nationalism and imperialism of the time made countries more willing to take risks and less likely to back down in the face of conflict. Furthermore, the political climate of the time was one of intense mistrust. Many European countries were deeply suspicious of one another, and tensions had been building for years. Diplomatic efforts to prevent war were often slow and ineffective, as leaders were more focused on their own interests than on finding peaceful solutions. The result was a war that no one wanted, but that was inevitable due to the political climate of the time. The human cost of World War I was staggering. An estimated 16 million people died, and the war set the stage for even greater conflicts in the future, including World War II. So, was World War I a war that no one wanted? The evidence suggests that it was. It was a war born out of miscommunication, fear, and the failure of diplomacy. It was a war that could have been avoided, but instead became one of the most devastating conflicts in history. Thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss future episodes where we continue to explore pivotal moments in history.